Okay, so the first question is, I guess let's start by asking a question that's a little bit interesting. Right now, I cannot find, if I search every nutritionist, doctor, and dietitian in the country, it's hard to find one that will say what Brian and Anna Marie Clement and Gabriel Cousens, and especially Brian and Anna Maria, say about fruit. Virtually in all health circles, fruit is considered a wonderful food that is recommended, and it's considered an ideal food. Now, when we talk about, my question is, how do we prevent dementia? But what everyone is saying is to eat a whole food, plant-based diet, and Brian and Anna Maria, and maybe Gabriel, is saying, look, fruit is been hybridized and picked unripe, and therefore it's actually contributing to blood sugar problems, and blood sugar problems, you're saying, contributes to dementia. And then the rest of the question is, well, even beans and grains, they also turn to sugar, so aren't they just like fruit? So if we're saying eat a whole food plant-based diet, and yet we want the anti-diabetes, anti-dementia plan, and that plan includes a whole food plant-based diet, which is fruit and beans and grains, which we say turn to sugar, what exactly are we saying here? And I'd be interested in everyone's opinion.
Well, I think that when we talk about fruit, we see a continuum, just like when we talk about carbohydrates. And when we talk about fruit, we're also talking about a lot of things that people consider as vegetables. After all, tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplant, these are all fruits. Even beans and peas are fruits, technically. So what we want to look at is the glycemic load. And the glycemic load is much more exact than the glycemic index. For instance, with watermelon, when you eat it, it tastes very sweet. You say, wow, this is really sweet. I wonder if this is going to hurt me. But the fact is, watermelon's 98.5% water. There's very little sugar in it. So when you look at the glycemic load, it's well under 10. It's actually not going to bump up your blood sugar. That's what glycemic load measures. So if you want to bump up your blood sugar, junk food is the way to go, like those cookies you mentioned a minute ago. Of course, you feel good with high blood sugar, but it's not really good for you. So also, when you're looking at fruit, probably the best fruit is the most loaded in anthocyanins to protect the brain. That's what we're looking for, is blueberries, strawberries, blackberries. These have very little sugar, and they have many of the protective antioxidants. So it's a bit of a balance. With a diabetic, when you have excess sugar in the blood, the damage to the arteries, the eyes, the kidneys is mediated through free radical damage. But fruit is loaded with antioxidants. So if you can eat the low glycemic load fruits, which by the way does include pears, peaches, and apples, they're all below 10 on the glycemic load scale. So I like to look at fruit. Now, when you look at bananas, yes, they're very sugary. And I totally agree that they're picked unripe. We're lucky we live on a fruit farm in Maui, and our fruit is not picked unripe. In fact, we usually wait for it to fall from the trees. So that's my concept of carbohydrates. We should look for a slow release. So beans and vegetables have carbohydrates too, but the release is so nice and slow that little by little over time, you get a little sugar in your bloodstream, your brain uses some, your heart uses some, it gets used up or stored in your muscles. Then a little more gets into your bloodstream. These type of slow-releasing sugars, and did you know, it's fascinating, that apples and strawberries in a recent study were shown to slow the absorption of sugars even from sugar. So fruits can actually, if they have enough polyphenols, can slow the absorption of other sugars too at the same meal. Isn't that interesting? Thank you.
I just want to comment on that as well, because there's studies that will show, for example, when they were looking at diabetics and they were having oatmeal, and they used to say, well, don't put any fruit on the oatmeal because, you know, say if you're eating real steel-cut oats, for example, or maybe granola, and then is the blueberries, for example, that they would put in, would that spike their blood sugar? Would that be detrimental? So a lot of diabetics would not eat fruit. But what they showed in the study was that, you know, when you put a little bit on there, like even people when they get a muffin or something, that's not a serving of the fruit. In fact, it's a lot of sugar and stuff. But what they showed is that if you actually had a serving of the blueberries, it had the opposite effect because you do get all the antioxidants, polyphenols, protein, and fiber that is needed to help control that glycemic index or spike. So I'm a proponent. I actually recommend people eating fruit. Now, I don't believe in like just people being a fruitarian and just eating only fruit, for example. And I do like people mixing things, like especially when there's a little bit of a high glycemic with some of the seeds or nuts, just a little bit, not too much, but we still need some of those to help balance that glycemic index, and also getting that immediate kind of rise in their blood because people are hungry, and then having maintained with a little bit slower release of getting a little bit more of the protein or fats. So when I think of like a trail mix, or sometimes people eat a granola, that's almost kind of a nice concept because sometimes the dried fruits can actually have a higher glycemic, it's a little concentrated in those foods. But when we have some of these other things that actually slow the glycemic index because they're super high in fiber, then that's a nice, wonderful balance. But because when we look at all these things that we give to help then treat some of these conditions, it's from the same foods that we're telling people to restrict. So I actually encourage it. Now, the amount, some people can actually overdo it, right? Because then people get all plant-based and they just want to do just only this barrier. That's too much of one thing. I want to be spread in a broad spectrum, a rainbow color of foods, and not just, we want to hit a little bit of all the categories, but not just only doing one or pounds of certain things and saying, oh, I'm going to go just carrot juice, for example.